Welcome to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sarah Mokram, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders to gain real insights. And today, we're joined by a founder who's operating at the intersection of technology, regulation, and risk, in a space most companies don't realize they're exposed in. Matt Elefant is a founder of Inclusive Web, a company focused on digital accessibility governance, helping businesses ensure their website, platforms, and digital applications meet compliance standards. Matt, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Of course. So, to start us off, if you could just ground everyone in what you actually do. I know I gave a brief intro there, but if
Yeah,
you could expand on that and just give us kind of at a high level, what does Inclusive Web do and in practice, and who are you built to serve?
yeah. Well, I think you summed it up really well in the fact that a lot of companies just don't realize that they have this exposure that they have to meet essentially what are American with Disability regulations, so most commonly referred to as the ADA. I always like to say if you have ever gone in a building and you've seen a ramp or go in an elevator and see braille next to buttons, all of those elements are kind of built not because builders necessarily want to do it, but it's all essentially governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act, which came into law under the first George Bush in 1990. The Americans with Disabilities Act essentially says that if you're going to be serving the public, you have to make certain public accommodations available for those people with disabilities. And the web is a place of public accommodation. And just like you have to make certain accommodations to a physical building, essentially you have to make public accommodations to your digital properties as well. Those accommodations often kind of go unknown to a lot of developers or business owners or product owners. Mostly they're kind of set and built underneath a rule umbrella that was created by an organization called the World Wide Web Consortium, which is normally referred to as the W3C. And there's roughly a set of 96 different test cases that we help businesses go through to make sure that their websites are accessible for people who are blind or have low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, have physical or motor disabilities, or cognitive disabilities. And so we do that by on having expert people who understand those WCAG guidelines. We employ a lot of people who are disabled themselves and use something called assistive technologies to essentially bridge the gap for them. And then we've built a bunch of automated tools that are kind of centered around artificial intelligence to help monitor your website because as you're creating new content, essentially you could build more things that make it out of compliance.
I really love what you guys are doing because I feel like it might be something that people don't actively think about, right?
Right.
But it's so important, especially in today's, day and age where everything's electronic. Everyone goes onto the website for information. So being able to be like your company name is inclusive for everyone is just so great. And
Thank
it's interesting too. You said you go through 97, was it tests? I
Yes,
mean, there
exactly.
must be so much that a normal developer or user is probably not even thinking about what their digital space really needs.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the 97 different test cases are really kind of centered around four primary principles. Those principles kind of spell out the acronym POUR. So if you think about essentially pouring accessibility into your website, that's kind of the basis of them. They stand for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So if you think about perceivable, it's about how do you make your website perceivable for those people that might not be able to see it. So if you ever think about adding alternate text into a website, or if you're posting on social media, sometimes they'll ask you to add alt text, and a lot of people think that's solely for SEO. But it's really kind of foundationally built for people who are blind and use screen readers who can't see your images. And the screen reader will essentially read that alternative text so that they understand, what it is to see.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I always thought it
Yeah.
was for SEO, but that makes a lot of sense, now that you mentioned that. So I'd love to zoom out for a moment because this isn't necessarily a space most founders set out to build from day one. You had also a long career in tech before launching this company. So what led you into this digital accessibility space and, made it worth building, really?
Yeah. As you said, it's kind of been a long journey. I started originally in digital streaming, and founded a company called Origin Digital, which was one of the first in the digital streaming space. I was fortunate enough to sell that to Accenture in around 2007, but was always very active in content management, content publishing. On a side, kind of parallel side, growing up, my father was diagnosed with a disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative eye disease. He passed away about 11 years ago from a rare form of leukemia. And when he passed away, we'd set up a nonprofit in his memory. Long before I started Inclusive, it was really kind of focused on he was a very passionate runner and cyclist. And so if you ever come to New York, we started a nonprofit called in Tandem, which provides free tandem cycling for folks who are blind, have low vision, or otherwise can't ride a bike on their own. And so, very active in tech, very active in the disabled community. And all the while kind of never really thought about how do I put those two elements together until one of my clients about 12 years ago received a lawsuit for having a website that was inaccessible, and then just realized kind of how big of a problem it is, how many people don't really understand how to build for accessibility. Business owners don't really understand the rules. Developers, although very technical, you know, don't really necessarily understand how or what the assistive technology does, and how to support it. And it just seemed like a great market opportunity, a problem that I could solve. And, you know, as they said, the rest is history.
So, what's interesting about accessibility is that the ADA has been around for decades, but digital enforcement has accelerated more recently. From when you started 6 years ago, or however many years ago, to now, how has that landscape shifted? Has awareness meaningfully improved, or are most businesses still behind there?
Yeah, oddly enough, we a lot of times when we're engaging with clients, we're kind of the first time, although awareness, I think while awareness is kind of slowly creeping up, I think awareness in terms of how to truly solve for accessibility is really still kind of unknown. A lot of people kind of think of it very much as like adding a widget to their site, or a lot of people think about by running scans through their site through like some of these free scanning tools. They can identify a lot of these issues. And then, unfortunately, after kind of receiving litigations in the mail, they realized that a lot of those solutions just don't kind of meet the mark. So I think while awareness has certainly crept up a little bit, I think truly kind of understanding exactly how to solve for it, how to incorporate people who are disabled themselves, what all the test cases really do, and how they support people are really just kind of getting into the awareness of product owners, developers, and the general public.
So, when companies first realize they may not be compliant, what stage are they typically in? I'm assuming, some of the things you've mentioned that people realize it once they get some sort of complaint or litigation. So, are these companies, are you finding, early startups, mid-market enterprise companies that are being hit with this litigation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's everybody. So there's an organization called WebAIM. They provide a free service which essentially scans the top million homepages, so not even the full site, just the top million websites in the United States, and analyzed them for accessibility issues. That trend has been coming down slowly, but let's just say out of a million websites, you want to take a guess about what the percentage is of how many of them fail accessibility?
That don't meet the
That
accessibility?
don't meet accessibility standards or
I
have
would
some major accessibility blocker that would prevent a user from fully accessing all the content.
I mean, I would assume very high, I
Right.
don't know if as high as 80 or 90%, or if that's way
Yeah.
too high.
Yeah. So it's literally, so in the last 6 years, that trend has been going down. So it started at like 97%. It went down to a low of about 94%. And they just announced recently that for the first time in 6 years, that trend has actually increased back up to 95%. Any guesses why?
Just an increase in people creating websites and using digital spaces and using
They
AI
think it's actually
tools.
because of AI tools. Yeah,
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 I was
AI
gonna
tools.
say.
So it's the proliferation of AI that's kind of creating a lot of fast content and
Mhm.
really kind of skipping the mark that's kind of adding for that increase. So yeah, unfortunately it's really all businesses, both mid market as well as really large enterprises that are unfortunately missing the mark.
So that kinda leads to a question I was having in the back of my head is these AI platforms, that are doing these websites where you can even just talk to an agent and then they create this beautiful looking website. Are most of them, people who are using them are just assuming that everything's being done for them just based on their prompts of what they want on it. So are most of those platforms not then implementing any accessibility? So that's where, some of that increase is coming from is just it's not part of the package.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, kind of part of it. I think those platforms that are just kind of creating sites from scratch and launching them out, I think that's part of it. I think in general, even when people are creating content, so if you think about posting an image, right? And maybe you might add some text on that image to kind of be kind of like the hero image of a story. If you're adding text on an image and posting it to the web, essentially that text is unreadable through a screen reader. And so all of those things really add to the complexity of how do you start to build and make elements and tools accessible for people.
So I would like to switch now to growth. So, in a
Yeah,
category where awareness is still developing, and just like we were talking about, that there's still so many, I mean, it's such a high percentage, it's kind of shocking.
right, right.
Client acquisition can look very different than in more established markets. So, today, how are you primarily acquiring customers?
Yeah. So we get to acquire customers really kind of on two paths. So one is, one obviously is customers who have received litigations in the mail and are getting onto the path of how to meet compliance because a lot of times as part of that settlement, they have to essentially build or make their website accessible relative to the WCAG standards. So that's kind of part one. There are more regulations that are coming into play around accessibility. So in Europe, they've launched something called the European Accessibility Act, which is essentially mandating that customers meet accessibility standards. And even if you're only serving in the US, in the European market, you might be a US company not realizing, but if you're, say, like I'm based in New York, if you're in hospitality or tourism and you're trying to attract out of town or out of state or out of country guests, essentially you could be falling underneath those European accessibility rules. So, um, So if you're serving the government as part of Title II, there's more standards associated with it under HHS rules. So Health and Human Services, there's new accessibility rules. And then, and I think lastly, there is a growing want and desire for large brands to think about accessibility and want to, meet those standards. I think it's not always just about, companies receiving a litigation in the mail, but I do think that there's a lot of brands out there that realize, that as you said, digital is their main point of customer interaction. It's their place for customer services. It's their place for digital transactions. There isn't a piece of kind of the customer workflow today that doesn't either start or end or have some place in the middle that relies on digital. And then when they build for accessibility, they're really kind of building for everybody, right? So if you're making your site, more accessible for screen readers, you're making it more accessible for bots that are part of AI. So it's becoming more indexable and more readable for SEO. I think if you look at social media, how many videos have open captions on them, which originated, in the accessibility space. So, when you're building with accessibility in mind, you are really opening up the door for lots of people. And in the US, 20% of the US population identifies with a disability. So, it really is the silent majority of people that you're cutting out by not, meeting accessibility standards.
Definitely. And I know from a previous call that we had, it sounded like, strong personal network and referrals have been a meaningful driver for
Yeah.
you and your company. So when growth is referral heavy, there's, of course, usually higher close rates, but the trade offs can be sometimes less predictability. How do you think about that trade off between kind of those high trust introductions versus building more of a scalable, repeatable demand channels?
Yeah. I mean, we're always trying to think 2 quarters ahead for our business. So that's really at the heart of it. When we start talking to people, unfortunately, I think deal cycles are long, whether it's 5,000, whether we're working with a small little brand on, a small website, or we're talking with like a large international brand, has like, tens of websites that they want us to, manage. Deal cycles are just long. And so it's really about constantly kind of nurturing the customer growth along the pathway. So we're always, at least 2 quarters ahead of the opportunities that we're of the people that we're talking to. I mean, sometimes it's years. I get to be a little relentless on some of this stuff because for me, look, I understand it, I was in the web management business, you only have so many dollars and so many resources at a period of time. And it's not that companies want to be inaccessible, it's just that they look at you and it's like, when you have this much to do and this much resourcing, and they themselves have their own kind of revenue targets or growth opportunities that they want to hit. They look at accessibility sometimes as a regressive step backwards that necessarily doesn't help propel the business forward. So we're always constantly looking at how we can convey that message that accessibility isn't just kind of like the underlying plumbing that doesn't add value. It does do a lot of other stuff for them, and just kind of staying at it. And I'm always saying, I'll look at a website, I can immediately tell if it's accessible or not. And I'm like, I know you'll be a customer of mine one day. It's just a matter of when. And so you just have to kind of stay at it. I mean, one customer, I think it took like 4 years. It wasn't even a big piece of business. It was just, it was just like, uh, just knowing that, it's like, that's unfortunately just, that's kind of the sales cycle. Sometimes it's like, how do you really kind of get to that right opportunity with them, um, uh, to kind of get them to close?
That's amazing you stuck with them for 4 years. So That's a
Yeah,
long
I mean,
sale.
it wasn't every day. It wasn't every day for 4 years, but they were on my list. They were on my list for 4 years. It would be at least like every 6 months, every 3 months. Sometimes something would come up. I constantly have like a list of people where, depending on certain things, like right now, there's this health and human services deadline that's hitting businesses come May 9th. And so by May 9th, if you are essentially a corporation serving 12, or if you're a company with 15 or more employees that receives funding either from Medicare or Medicaid, essentially your digital property has to be accessible, right? So think about all of those people and all of those types of companies. It's everything from like a large dentist office to a large pharmaceutical that might do, trial runs to a pharmacy to, a hospital. So it's kind of a wide swath. And so when information comes up like that, I have like a set of people that I kind of continually pepper. I always think they're going to be like, oh my God, thank you, Matt, for telling me, let's do a deal right now and having get in. But it's usually a little slower than that.
Yeah. So that kind of leads a little bit into my next question of, experimenting with cold outreach. And so not from reactive, from a litigation and not from a network referral. So tell me about that in practice and, what have you tried and what's felt promising and then didn't pan out how you wanted?
Yeah, I think that, cold outreach is certainly a tactic that we use. Obviously, we use it because we get in lists of terms of like who's received litigation. So those folks go in as part of our cold outreach. Market sectors that are impacted, like the HHS requirement, we'll send out a cold email campaign, for um it kind of varies. I think sometimes it's definitely, of all the channels we try, somewhat reliable in the sense that we will get someone. Just the numbers are so different, obviously, from going from a referral standpoint and a networking perspective, where at least 1 out of 4 people will call me back. Here it's like 1 out of 1,000, which is sometimes defeating, but I've developed a lot of good relationships from people that I've met through cold outreach. So, I mean, it does work.
And so I want to refer back to something you mentioned to me about an internal shift happening at Inclusive Web, moving from primarily done for you services to more of self service tools and AI driven enhancements. So when
Hmm.
you think about that transition, what tension exists between kind of maintaining that high touch service and building the scalable solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's really about trying to meet customers where they are. At the end of the day, we really, even though, let's just say, like a large restaurant might be our customer, at the end of the day, we're really serving the disabled community and making sure that for our customers, they're able to meet customers where they are in terms of, their um, making their applications accessible for people with disabilities. So we always want to not just give someone like a free scan and say, no, our service is done. We really want to try to make it easy for them to truly build for accessibility. So, certainly AI has helped us in that regard, kind of shortening the time cycles in terms of like how well we're able to automate some of the work that we're doing from a manual perspective, the types of information we can give customers. Because solving for accessibility and all the things that people have to do and build for in terms of like API integrations and all this other stuff, solving for accessibility is relatively easy when you think about it from that perspective. So, AI is a great outreach for us in terms of helping our customers truly diagnose where those elements are. And so we are doing a lot more where it's like, how do we kind of give the tools that we've done and develop over to our customers so they can kind of run it on their own?
Hmm.
And that's a slow transition because we obviously want to still help and make sure that they are meeting accessibility needs at the end of the day.
So now looking ahead over the next 6 to 12 months, if everything goes right over these next half year, 12
Right.
months, what would success look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, it's always about how do we, um, how do we shorten our deal cycles? How do we release more of these self-service tools, into the marketplace? And how are we kind of onboarding our customers in a way where they're starting to see this not so much as just the accessibility compliance check mark, but really trying to understand and saying, wow, when we're building for accessibility, we're kind of meeting all these other marks and really, helping folks along the way. We do a lot right now where at the end of the cycle when we work with customers. So usually after 60 days, we can take a customer from having a site that's completely inaccessible to something that, really meets the WCAG guidelines. And at the end of that process, we actually bring in folks who identify with various disabilities to kind of do like a showcase with them in terms of how they're able to use their websites. And those are always really very powerful moments. Like we were working with a large quick service restaurant. Um, they have an online ordering system, and one of the testers we brought in, is I'm 50. She's like, say, yeah, she's a younger woman who's 20, but identifies as blind since birth. And was going through the ordering process with like their CTO on the phone. Like it's a relatively big organization with relatively important people that we had on the call, and it's like their CTO and one of the heads of digital was on the line. And so here's this young girl in her 20s, never really gave a Zoom meeting before, but showing how she's ordering through their website and how she's able to kind of customize her order, and she was like, this is one of the first times I'm able to do this completely on my own. And I think like those moments really kind of take everyone back because it's not just so much about, meeting a check mark, but it's really about how do we empower, people to, you know, live their fullest lives, be able to interact. As you said, there's nothing today that doesn't have digital interaction within it. And when those services are closed off to you and you have to ask somebody to fill out a form for you, it's very disempowering. And when we can work with companies to kind of show them that this isn't just about not getting sued, but really empowering their customers, it's that to me is very meaningful.
Yeah, I can imagine seeing that, for that company and how meaningful and no matter what that cost is, I feel like that would just have such a great
Right.
and I mean, of course, to a certain level, but it just there's that humanity piece
Yeah.
in
I mean, it struck
of
everybody. Really like, I mean, I kind of get teary eyed thinking of it,
yeah.
but it's one of those really empowering moments that we're really proud to be a part of.
Well, it's one of those moments too that I mean, majority of us just aren't thinking about, right?
Right.
And it thinking of those, who may have a disability that can't order food online, which we've all taken for granted now of being able to do, a quick dinner order, whatever that has just boomed since COVID, really, and all the
Right.
online ordering and to feel like, okay, now my company has been able to include everyone. It must be
It's
so,
right.
so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, a designer hands in something where they're like, wouldn't it be great if you could have a little slider that indicates your heat level on a food item, right? But if
Mm,
that slider isn't keyboard accessible, right, you're leaving out a lot of people who might not be able to use a mouse,
mhm.
right? Or if that those indexes aren't accessible through a screen reader, again, lots of people just can't use it. And so, yeah, when you're able to kind of help identify those and show people how to fix it in a relatively quick and easy fashion, it's just a very powerful thing.
Definitely. So then on the flip side of my question, what's the biggest risk or constraint that could slow down the momentum for this next year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the economy is always something that we're always, watching. Again, I think for us, it's a lot of things that this is a lot of times that it's a new, we're relatively a new line item for a lot of companies. So, they don't necessarily have digital accessibility testing in their budget items. So it's a new things. And so when elements within the economy happen. Obviously, those are things that they say, well, we'll push to next year. I think, again, kind of the misinformation of what it takes to be accessible. So I think there's a lot of kind of scanning tools out there that kind of will give a company a score on their website. And so there's a lot of kind of counterselling that we go through to kind of have to show people why that score is kind of meaningless and why it's really a challenge for them to want to have to believe it. So, those types of things are always, the biggest challenge for us. So, other companies trying to just kind of absorb our space by saying, "Hey, it's an add-in for us. Well, we have this scan. Don't worry about paying somebody else to go do it. We can for you," or just general economic conditions.
That makes sense. And for those who want to keep up with you or learn more about your work, where's the best place to connect and follow along?
Yeah, I'm always on LinkedIn posting uh, wild and random stories about accessibility and our journeys in accessibility and tool tips. We add a lot of blogging features on our website. So our website is inclusiveweb.co. I am I'm the I am the older Matt Elefant on LinkedIn. There's two Matt Elefants. One is my cousin who I've barely met on the West Coast, and there's me who's based in New York. So I'm the other Matthew Matthewelefant Matthew Elefant on LinkedIn, and reach out to me. I'm happy to connect.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to Mo's Market Pulse. And thank you again, Matt, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.